I have the wonderful human, Andy Reid, joining me. I am so excited because, Andy, you are an award-winning auctioneer. You are just a beautiful person all around. You have your High Performance Humans podcast, which I absolutely love the people who you've had the honor of speaking with. You are a high performance coach and you are an author, Success Curious, which Andy just told me he's waiting for his books to arrive today. And I'm so, so, so happy for you, my friend, because I look up to you like a brother. So, welcome, Andy, to the conversation today.
Thank you. So I tell you what, we talk about you mentioned there the whole brother thing. And this really has been like a big brother, little sister relationship.
Mm,
From the word go. It's just
yeah.
been weird how we seem to have followed our own paths. We've followed our own lanes, but wow, like, it's just been so cool to see how each of us have evolved. And you're so more than most, man. I mean, it's been amazing, man. So I'm absolutely delighted to be on.
I love it. Yes, it's been 11-year evolution journey for you and I since we first crossed paths when I had my first gig, second gig as an assistant property manager where we both worked for a Stockdown Lego office. And I remember back then the Andy, and what I loved about you, Andy, and I don't think I've said this to you before, is the confidence that you have, and whether or not you have felt that all the time. But I remember even back then just really being in awe of the confidence that you had just as a human being, whether it was talking on the phone or talking to the people in the office. That's what I always remember about you.
Look, it's not something. It depends. It depends where I'm at, man. I mean, it's sort of it's that whole thing. If you've got the right circumstances, the right environment, and whatnot, then confidence comes pretty easy, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
it's not something that's on permanently. Not gonna lie, but yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. At the end of the day, man, it's easy. It's easy to be confident if you've got if you don't think too much about motives or motivations of other people, right? If you just as long as you're confident in who you are, it's pretty easy, man.
Yeah. I remember some people saying to me like stick to your own lane, and I thought, what does that actually mean? And I thought stick to your own lane really means that it's just you. It's you versus you, and I speak about this a lot as well, and I think that's when, if we can stop comparing ourselves to other people, if we can mask out the judgment from others and realize that that's just a reflection of them and where they are at, then really, then that confidence just has to come from yourself and that motivation from yourself, because we speak about it as well, Andy, like our purpose and our why, and that should be your driver towards the confidence that you have in all areas of your life and business.
It's the whole phrase "stick to your own lane." It's being used quite frequently as a derogatory
Mm,
comment,
it
and
has, yeah.
I think that's where there's a lot of misunderstanding as
Hmm.
to what that actually means in the context of your life. So a lot of people get told to stick in your own lane when they're looking to expand the horizons, or if they are threatening the position of someone else within an organization or an industry or a movement or whatever it is, right? And they get told, "Nah, man, stick in your own lane," like because there's a feeling that you know we as a society are labeling you. That is, and it's like society's telling you that is your lane,
Mm,
right? And which is, it's for one, it's bullshit, and it's very much akin to the tall poppy carry on, right?
yeah.
That we couple all the while. But the reality is, and I was having a chat to Ravi Sharma about this, really, really cool lad. And we were talking about, focusing on your own lane, but the narrative around it has to become a lot more aligned with the integral positive nature of it
Mhm.
within society, because it's not to say that just because you're running your own race and running in your own lane, that your lanes can't converge with other people, right? So we are born to be in a tribe. That's how our existence is wired.
Mm.
And there's nothing to say that your lanes can't converge with other people. for a time and then diverge off and so on and so forth. But it's a really, really cool thing to be able to focus on your own lane,
Yeah.
right? I think that's where we need to sort of flip that narrative a little bit and stop using it or stop seeing it as a derogatory term, which is why a lot of people use it as a bit of a constraining sort of
Mhm.
thing to say to people. Really, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had someone say that to me 3 years ago, Andy, and boy, oh boy, have I
Oh, they
focused on
did.
my own lane.
Your lane's bloody massive now. It's a bloody big lane.
It's all perspective though, right? It's perspective and it's, we've all got different ways of how we will view things or take things on or, even digest a conversation or digest a podcast. And I think it comes down to the perspectives and how we shape things that we hear and see as well. So, I hope that gives some encouragement to the BDMs listening today too, when we say stick to your own lane. It's just focus on yourself, and you've got
And
so much you can control.
on that, when it if we relate it from a practical point of view, I know I know for a fact that when I first started in sales, in real estate sales, when I knew better, in my very first month, I sold 3 houses, and I thought, geez, how easy is this?
Mm,
And then I spent the next 8 or so months trying to conform to a narrative, to a real estate narrative. I was trying to follow scripts and dialogues and try and follow them to the T and doing all this sort of jazz, right? And it
mm,
was doing my head in, and I did nothing. I got one listing, I didn't manage to sell that because half of it was falling over, and it was in the middle of old cranny, right? So there's soil moving and all sorts of crap going on there.
yeah.
And it took me like I ended up getting to the brink of shit, like questioning my own existence and thinking, well, I'm gonna need to get put in a padded cell here. And it was only then I was like, screw it. I'm just gonna be me in this game and see how that goes. Because if it doesn't work then I am done.
Mhm.
And that realistically is a very practical interpretation of focusing on your own lane. Because as soon as
Yeah.
I focused on my lane, the game changed
Yeah.
completely. It's a very powerful thing to be able to focus on your own lane. It's not a derogatory term. It's not, I'm being labeled as a BDM and therefore I can do no more. Well,
Mhm.
that's bullshit. You can do more, but to be able to have complete empowerment in your own identity, and that is what your own lane is. It's your identity essentially. Then my word, you become so much more powerful in whatever it is you do.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I was saying is about take control is when I was a BDM, yeah, sure, there was a lot of different training that the office provided or the franchises that I was working for. It wasn't until I actually started looking beyond just what the franchise or the offices were providing is when I saw the most exceptional and phenomenal growth for myself because
Mm.
I decided to invest in myself. I decided to see what I wanted to focus on. No one else was telling me, hey, do this course, or hey, do this training, or hey, we've got this. I feel like that was when I went from being, a great BDM to an exceptional high performing BDM was when I really took control of on focusing on my own lane and looking at my identity, not just as a BDM, but as a human.
No, as a human being, and my word, I mean, when I was watching that from the sidelines, it was very, very evident that you'd found who you are, like who you are supposed to be, as opposed to who you are told to be.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the real estate space, we very much fall into one of three categories. We fall into what operators, how operators, and why operators, right?
Hmm.
And the what operators operate, there's about 80% of the industry works in that category, right? So that's the big majority. And they can operate in terms of they know what to do, and they take on the knowledge and they are able to regurgitate it, right? The next 15%, and there's a bit of bro science thrown in here. The next 15% are the how operators, and they can take the knowledge and be able to interpret it into how it works for the consumer, right? So they put it in the language of the consumer.
Hmm.
The last 5% are the why operators, and not only do they understand why they exist in what they do? But they understand why their consumers are doing what they're doing as well, and can relate all information to that greater purpose. And it's a very practical way of looking at what we're talking about, right? And because everybody talks about how, or wants to know how they can set themselves apart from
Mm.
their competitors. And a lot of them, yeah, and people like us, they'll hear people like us say, oh, you've got to be yourself, and all the shit that we just talked about before.
Yeah.
But in a practical sense, the reality is, if you can't take the knowledge and information and be able to put it into a language that your consumers can understand, and well, for a start, in BDM land, you could go one step back and say, are you sure you know all the legislation in your state? Like,
Mm.
are you sure that you know anything that is relevant or pertinent to the decision-making process of an investor? That's not just legislation, right?
Mm.
It's not just management fees, it's not just inspections and routines and lease fees and all that sort of jazz. That sort of stuff is the icing atop a knowledge cake,
Mm-hmm.
which has a heck of a lot more fat in it that comes before any of that final decision making process, which is your management fee, your lease fee, your break fee, blah 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 blah. That's all the end stuff. It's the meat of the cake that's really really important, and we need in PM land. We've got to be able to understand that, but also be able to interpret it in a way that our consumers can understand why it's relevant to them. And that's why you always see, for every agent that's offering piss or management fees, there's another agent still operating at sevens and eights and whatever, right? And doing it quite readily. And
Yeah.
it's not coincidence, it's not luck, it's not the fact that they've got no competition, because every area's got bloody competition these days. But for some reason, some leaders are focusing on it still, where they're just banging on it, they're just bitching and moaning about people offering no fees, and oh, you lot should be raising your fees. And come on, at the end of the day, it's their business model. Why don't you
Mhm.
focus on making sure that you can demonstrate value, as opposed to bitching and moaning about other people offering it for less?
Yeah.
Like, as if that's going to change anything.
Yeah.
So, and it sort of coincides with a conversation that we've been having on a project that I'm working on,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be sexy and fun
Yeah.
and energizing and imaginative, and it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun. We're going to ruffle some feathers, but the industry needs some feathers ruffling.
Absolutely.
Um, we need to get a grip of ourselves
Mm.
instead of whinging and moaning about how it used to be.
Yeah.
Like, we've got
Absolutely.
ourselves to blame, right?
I think anyone listening or watching, like I just said in my head, abso-fucking-lutely about like 5 times just then, Andy, because it's so spot on. And we're talking here, you know, when it comes to BDMs, and there are a lot of BDMs out there that have come from a sales background or have been trained only by sales directors. Okay. So we've got
Mhm.
BDMs out there who are essentially representing the property management arm who have no idea on the legislation when it comes to property management. They also have never owned an investment property before or don't have the knowledge of what an investor goes through before they even engage a property manager, because often the manager are the last people who an investor will engage with. Now, there are some people out there, Ashley Goodchild, like bless her, and she's helped many of my
Oh,
clients
top
take to
chick,
the next level. The
top chick.
investor support services, when we are now encouraging BDMs, property managers to help investors from the get-go, not once they have just purchased a property. Because we know, Andy, and you know, as a sales agent, we're helping the vendor, we're not helping the purchaser, right?
Mm.
So this is when these investors need these BDMs pre-purchase to help them make the right decisions and make sure that they essentially are linking arms with someone who gives a shit about their biggest asset, because they are spending thousands and thousands of dollars that they've worked hard for. And what, they're just going to hand it over to someone, just hoping that they're going to look after it because they're offering 4% management fee? Absolutely not, right? So let's get real. And that's why I wanted you to come on today, Andy, because I want to talk about, from your experience and listing presentations. And I
Mm.
know you've just spoken about the what, how, and why. And a mistake that I see a lot of people making in their listing presentations is they have no clue about the why. It's not articulated in their proposals. It's not articulated when they're sitting down in the lounge room with a particular client. So, what do you think makes a winning presentation?
So the thing with property management and rent rolls, and the level to which it really solidifies as a valuable asset in your business, right? It's no good. You could have the best PMs in the world,
Mm,
right? The value that they gain is not dependent on them.
mm,
It's not decided by them. It's decided by the BDM that goes out and does this presentation. So you can have the rock stars, the real top drawer operators, right? Sat at the desk ready to go. And they could genuinely offer the best service known to man, right? But if your front line, if your first real connection with that client, i.e., the BDM, isn't at the same level, bought in to the
mm,
philosophy, bought into the importance of that service level, right? And if they can't articulate it, not just verbally, but with an energy and an enthusiasm and a confidence and a conviction that they are legit the best crew in the area, bar none, don't no, it's not even a debate, then you are never going to get the value that your property management deserves.
mhm.
It's like this is something that so many businesses are missing massively because all they're worried about is getting more numbers on,
Yeah.
right? And I'm seeing it uh, frequently at the minute where there are rent rolls being pushed around for sale and whatnot, right? And at the minute, but because their management fees are bang average, no one wants to touch them.
Yeah.
No one wants to touch them. And therefore, you built this asset thinking that you've got this thing that you'll be able to sell. You can't sell it.
Yeah.
So, we talk about the importance of service and blah, 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 blah. But if you haven't got someone at the tip of the spear able to convey that with enough enthusiasm in order for that, not just their words, but their energy to
Mm,
be able to show without any question that they're the right person for the asset management, then you're screwed.
yeah.
You're absolutely screwed. And so that's the first point from a presentation point of view. You got to believe in it, man. You got to
Yeah.
believe in what you sell. You got to know what you sell.
Mhm.
Like as an auction, and this it doesn't matter that I'm an auctioneer. Like as an auctioneer, I know for a fact that I'll know more about a property than eight out of 10 agents because I read every contract of every property that I sell,
Mm,
right? Because you can't sell what you don't know. And
yeah.
the BDM can't sell the rental department if they don't know how the hell it works,
Spot on.
right? So you got to know your product.
Yeah.
Got to know your product. Um,
Interesting enough, too, Andy. Sorry, but I was actually speaking to a director this morning and love him because he actually said, I don't know if my rental department is profitable because I've just been taught to just focus on sales. And I was like, this is the common thing though, right?
yeah,
It is still common. Whereas we know a rental department absolutely can be profitable. You should know your numbers. You should be able to tell your team and your BDM, hey, this is how much we need to make per property. This is why, right? So they can invest back into the business because of the cost that it takes to actually sustain a level of service so that they can continue to provide a high level of service to their investors, like investor nights and things like that, extra things like that, the standard property management departments don't do. They just manage properties and that's it. They don't continue to get their clients on board and involved with their vision and their purpose, which is what we're talking about, right? So essentially what you're saying, Andy, is that it starts from the top. Yeah.
yeah, it starts from the top. But what we don't really articulate enough as an industry. Not you, I'm sure you do, but as an industry, um, the strength of your BDM can affect the proper profitability of your rent roll
Mm-hmm.
exponentially, good or bad.
Yeah.
So you might have a relatively average PM setup that does everything okay, but if you've got a BDM that is rock and roll, then the profitability of your rent roll will be so much better. Like a bang average or a not very well focused BDM versus a real player that
Mm.
is, so driven and focused and one-eyed on their rent on the growth of it and whatnot, and understands their product. That can be the difference going from an average management fee of 4.5, for example, to an average management fee of 6.5%. How's that going to affect your profitability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, seriously, for one hire, for
Yeah.
one hire. So, and I know you wanted to talk about why, and I think we probably should talk on that first. We're talking about, and we'll come back to listing presentations because we do need to talk about the fact that because rent rolls are becoming increasingly more challenging to remain profitable, the first thing to get chopped is generally your BDM.
Mm. Yeah.
And so, and it's a bit of a false dawn. And I know it's really difficult to be able to ride that storm. However, with, I would argue, very little effort in training and cut and polish on your BDM, and you can make a significant change in the attitude towards management fees and so on and so forth. And it can happen relatively quickly as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Absolutely.
I think so.
Yeah.
And it's if you're not careful and you just chop out your BDM who's supposed to be there to demonstrate value, and you rely on a property manager who might not have the personality type in order to be able to exude that level of confidence. I mean, I'm sure they'd be incredible at what they do, but they're incredible at what they do, and this is not what they do,
Mm.
right? So it's no slight on them that they can't sell the services as effectively as a dedicated BDM, nor
Yeah.
should they be able to, because otherwise, they're in the wrong role.
Yeah.
Um, but that's what's happening a lot at the minute, is that there's
I
a
have seen
reliance on a
that.
senior PM,
Yeah.
or the director will go out, right, and
Mm-hmm.
do it. But
Yeah.
then the director's got one eye on that, one eye on the sales board, one eye on the P&L, one eye on reception, one eye on, I don't know how many eyes they've got. So the necessity to have a solid BDM it's I would argue it's more critical than ever,
Mm.
because if you've got a really good BDM that can maintain decent fees, then and do it justifiably, then you'll have the spare margin to be able to take on a few more people. You'll have the spare margin to be able to make sure that your salaries are competitive, right? You'll have the freedom or the little bit of financial capacity to be able to look at and explore and do some R&D on outsourcing and so on and so forth to refine that business further. Unless unless you're a director that is dedicated to that role of BDM, which happens, that's cool. Horses for courses. But if you're not, and you are just purely sales, got to be careful, man.
Yeah.
You've got to be very, very careful that you don't have the wrong piece of the puzzle in that spot, because the picture won't come clear very, very easily.
Yeah. Well, I have seen a decline of BDMs, and I'm seeing some agencies choose not to replace their BDM. So you absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Andy, with what you said. And the impact on growth, not replacing a dedicated BDM. So is your belief then that if an agency is really looking to scale and dedicated for growth, do you believe that it shouldn't just be up to the property managers, like they should have a dedicated BDM? Is that what you believe, unless they're actually training their property managers to also put a BDM hat on?
we both know that it is a completely different skill set.
For sure, I know that, but yeah, do you?
It's a completely different skill set. So unless you have got a BDM that can sorry, a property manager that can really rock and roll and
Mm,
has got a solid assistant and their systems and everything are in place and they have capacity to be able to dedicate at least 2, 3 hours of business development work a day,
mm,
they could do that. Great. I mean, you'd argue if there's enough spare time in the property management department to allow for that, then you might want to have a look at your structures. I will argue, but there's if you've got a PM, if you've got a PM with a personality, and there's let's and we know very well that there are plenty of property managers with personality, man. Jeez
Oh
Louise.
yeah.
Oh gosh. Then fine. If you want to give a property manager a chance to earn a bit more dough with commissions and things like that,
Mm,
rock and roll if they've got the capacity to do it.
yeah.
But you know for a fact that every hour that they aren't doing business development activities, it's another hour that you're potentially missing out on growing your portfolio.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And look, it is. And let's not sit here in an ivory tower. When money's tight, it is so difficult to keep justifying that sort of expense on a growth item like a BDM.
Mm,
It's so difficult to justify it, right? We've all been there, and we'll all be there again at some stage.
yeah.
Um, However, the picture gets a lot more clear if you just run through the numbers of it, run through the black and white of it, right?
Hmm.
And make sure, because if you run through the black and white of it, the KPIs, the requirements, the growth requirements in order for them to vindicate their existence, logically, become very, very clear. And I think that's probably a lot of the problem, like what you said with that director.
Mm,
Um, all you need to do is literally work out the physical, tangible numbers. It's actually a lot easier in PM land than it is in sales land to do this.
mm,
So if you work out, right, we need X amount of properties at this management fee, da 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 da, then that's what we need. That will justify a BDM.
yeah.
And you make sure that there's accountability. That's the other thing, because BDMs like being autonomous. And really, you need to make sure that a BDM is very, very comfortable being autonomous,
Yeah.
right? Very comfortable, because it's all part of self-determination theory that I've become a bit of a geek on. Says
I love it.
seriously, apparently being an author now, it really does rubber stamp me as a geek, I think. So I read this study on self-determination theory, and it first started. It's had evolutions of it since 1977, and the whole thing is look. It started with a theory to disprove that basically motivation is created by the gaining of external things. So it's all about eudaimonic versus hedonistic motivation. So internal versus external, intrinsic versus external motivation. And there's three elements to intrinsic motivation, right, that they deduced. One of them is autonomy, that sense of having complete control over your world, right? The second one is competence.
Mm,
And that's what we talked about before, right?
yeah.
You need to know what you're selling,
Mhm,
right? You need to know any of the things that could come into an investor's mind that creates doubt.
mhm,
Whether it is, I saw this bit of news about this legislation come up. I saw this, I saw that, I saw this. If you are able to talk to any of those sort of things freely, then you're two-thirds of the way there. Now, the third one is relatedness,
mhm,
right? The third one's relatedness. And relatedness, to me, my interpretation of relatedness is both your ability to be able to relate your actions to the end goal, your actions to the game, you to the situation and the environment. But I think to really put that on steroids, it would be a relatedness to who you are as an individual as well, which
mm,
is something that the study doesn't really talk to that much. but I think it's incredibly important, right? So for me, I could nail all three of those from a property management point of view, but who I am is not necessarily a desk jockey. So therefore, there's going to be a little bit of a clash there still that'll hold me back a little bit, right? And that's where I think the who bit sort of comes into play, and your worth, because our worth is within our DNA. It's not something that we build; it's something that we have, and we just need to find the right place for it, right?
Yeah.
So those three elements, if you nail those three and you can find those three in a BDM, you're going to get someone that has got a well of motivation within themselves, i.e., you can rely on the fact that they're going to be going and giving it a red hot crack, right? So they're really important from an interviewing process.
Yeah.
Look at those three elements, right? It's really, really important. Now, in terms of um, how we get these how these BDMs can really change the nature of the game for any sort of business. Being able to own, like what you did, right? Like what you did. When you realized, when the penny dropped for you, you took complete ownership of that role and its success,
Hmm.
right? And you made sure that irrespective of any other element of the business, the bit that was yours, you were fully accountable for and fully accountable for its success,
Yeah.
right? And so if a business owner finds a BDM who can know their product, be comfortable in their own with their autonomy and require autonomy as well. Intrinsic motivation requires you to have to want to rock and roll, right? For yourself, right? And have that level of control. Um, if you can find a BDM that's got that sort of shit, and then and the thing is, they don't even have to relate. They don't even have to be massively sort of passionate about investments and stuff, right? I wasn't. I mean, I'm not. I don't really. I'm not really attached to material things myself, right? I, give or take, you can houses can come and go for me. I'm not really enthused about a house,
Yeah.
but when I managed to connect that relatedness to the fact that I bloody love making success more accessible, and I'm using houses as a vehicle,
Hmm.
then we're on to something then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So
I think,
good. Self-determination. And do you think though that you can teach that?
yes, the last bit, the who bit, you can't
Mm.
because that's about worth, and that's a DNA thing. Now you can teach people to find that. I think or not teach. You can help guide people to finding that. I believe, but the other three, because autonomy also comes from the level of backing that that person feels that they have,
Mm. Hmm.
and the ability to feel like they are free to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And that is something that's an environment that's partly an environment thing, right? As
Yeah.
well. Autonomy isn't just an internal thing, it's an external thing as well, in the sense of you need to make sure that the environment, the conditions around that BDM are such that they are free to swing the bat as hard as possible. And
Yeah.
if they hit, great. If they miss, that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Now, it's not to say that they're allowed to make the same mistake and miss the same pitch 17 times, right? There's a limit.
Yeah.
There's a limit for sure. Um, However, just having that freedom to know that they can give something a red hot crack.
For sure. Yeah.
So I think you can teach that. The competency thing, that's black and white.
Yeah.
That's just a BDM learning their shit.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like a bar that used so when I ran a vodka bar in London, there was a bar up the road. There was a dedicated cocktail bar, right? It's called Be At One. And these guys, before they were allowed to serve a drink, they had to take two-hour tests to make sure that they were at a level of competency to be able to face the customer,
Yeah. I love that.
right? And as a result of that, they got this cult. They had this cult following, right?
Mhm.
And it used to get me blind drunk, and I wouldn't even notice. Right? Right? Yeah, we had this unwritten rule that if you were a manager in a different bar and you went into an opposing bar, it was their job to get you hammered for free. It was great. Anyway, but realistically, the standards you set for yourself are the standards you accept elsewhere, right? And as a BDM, if it was me, I would only feel confident to be autonomous if I knew that I could back my knowledge.
Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
But that's black and white, man. Like you either
Mhm.
know it or you don't, and that's the easy bit.
Yeah.
So I think it can be, but it's
Yeah.
got to be guided, it's got to be molded, it's got to have the right environment around it.
I definitely resonate with that, Andy. And from my experience, I use the analogy like if you were a bird and you had your wings clipped, you wouldn't be able to fly, right? So if we look at that as a human being, we don't want our hands tied. We want to be able to go out there and actually do the activities that we love to do because as a business development managers they thrive on connections and relationships and people so they don't want to be behind a desk and the other thing Andy I think I just want to touch base on as well when we're talking about the BDM role because there's also a misconception that a BDM just closes deals directors if you're listening to this podcast today BDMs do not just close deals. I want to make that very, very clear. Their role is expansive and they will also contribute to the growth of the sales division as well. So I just want to make that clear when we're talking about the BDM role versus, property management. A property manager might be able to close deals, but if you want phenomenal growth, then a BDM is going to essentially be the face of your business with getting stakeholders involved and referral partnerships and nurturing current connections as well, which I think is super, super important. A couple of things when I was a BDM, Andy, I actually rebelled a couple of times. And Pete, if you're listening to this, you'll probably have a laugh, but actually in the day we had charcoal uniforms and I absolutely fucking hated it, Andy. I looked like a nun, right? So we're talking about right? We're talking about confidence here. When I went to work and I had to wear a charcoal uniform that made me feel like a nun, do you think that I felt confident showing up that day? No. So I wore black sometimes until they were like, Sarah, you have to wear charcoal because, not everyone else can wear black. But that was because I was like, this is me. I wear black. I'm wearing black now. It makes me feel good. I'm confident when I wear black, right? The other thing is when it comes to the BDM role is I was told don't worry about social media. Again, listen, and this is going back, how long ago now? 6.5 years ago, when it wasn't as explosive as it is now, but I didn't listen. And what I did though was build what I call my digital equity. And back then, I didn't have the confidence that I had now with showing up, but I knew the importance of showing up. And then I got help along the way to help me elevate that confidence to be able to do what I do now. So I absolutely agree with you, Andy, when you said that it can be taught. And we all have fears, doubts, and insecurities, right?
Oh,
And
shit.
that's why we've
Oh,
also
heaps.
got trainers because we fill those gaps with the people that we coach and we mentor. And a lot of the things that I teach as well is helping BDMs find their confidence. And you'll see a lot of reviews that I get is Sarah helped me get my spark back. Sarah helped me with my confidence because once they have that confidence instilled in themselves, nothing can fucking stop them then, right? Because they believe they can do it. They've had someone else believe that they can do it. So I absolutely agree with everything that you have said. So take note, BDMs, that it is possible for you to aim high and shoot for the stars and really the only person stopping you from reaching the success that you want ultimately is going to be yourself.
Yeah, it is. It is, and you can sort of can hear people sort of saying now, yeah, but my boss does this, and my boss doesn't let me do that, and my boss doesn't let me do the other. They to quote Jim Rohn, not someone else, it was Jim Rohn that said this. You're not a tree. You can move.
Yeah.
You can move. What I will say to your point, the uniform thing that you mentioned there.
Yeah.
Um, that is a BDM's responsibility, in my opinion, to really make sure that the boundaries and the parameters of the game that they are playing in
Mm.
are understood,
Yeah.
right? It's the BDM's responsibility. So if you have a particular issue with, so I think if Sarah was to go and retrace her steps with said charcoal uniform, I think you would be way more inclined now that you are super knowledgeable and the knower of all things BDM,
Yes.
that you would, instead of just being a rebel and wearing black, you would go to the director and say, "Hey, I understand and appreciate why you want uniformity in what we're wearing because it's a representation of the collective brand. I get that. I understand that. I appreciate that. I have a personal issue with it in the sense of X, Y, and Z. I would like the opportunity, I would like the chance to be able to wear black stuff, because I do feel that when I'm going into presentations, I'm going to feel a lot more confident in myself. And it might sound a little bit airy-fairy, but if I'm going into a presentation not worrying about how I look because I'm happy with what I'm wearing, then I can focus on the job at hand, which is getting you a lot more rentals at a higher management fee. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And if
Absolutely.
and if you can justify that as opposed to just being a little pain in the arse, um,
Yes,
then
Pete. Sorry, I was a pain in the ass.
yes, then you will find a much more fruitful relationship, and you will find as a BDM that as and when you do want to push the boundaries a little bit and be a little bit risque or be a little bit as your father, then you will have a director that's a bit more bought into your direction,
Mm.
which I
Yeah.
think is really important, man, because it's a working relationship. You as much as we're talking about directors taking on BDMs, because BDMs are a human billboard. That's all they are. That's what they are.
Yeah.
They're a human billboard for your brand, and so you want them to be more active than almost anyone in the office, from a social media, from an out there networking, and all that sort of stuff. You want them more prominent than anybody else in that team,
Yeah.
in every platform and medium, right? And it's not just a case of flashing, dashing, and talking about awards and all that sort of bollocks. It's flexing that knowledge muscle publicly, constantly, so that the credibility that you will gain from having a digital footprint that not just flashes the good, which is what social media has become. It's just become a highlight reel, right? But offers information and knowledge based on questions that you know get asked on the regular, for
Oh, yeah.
example, um, then shit. Then because your digital footprint is who you are when you're not around. And
Absolutely.
and if and if that doesn't match up to the thing that you're selling, then there's immediate doubt cast. And you know for a fact that investors are going to do a lot more homework because they think that a lot of them think that they're clever, right? So they'll do a lot more homework. They've got more
Yeah.
time. It's not as emotional, so therefore they want to see credibility.
Yeah.
So your
But
BDM,
credibility beyond just listed and just leased properties too, Andy. I want to like
oh
I can't
man,
I can't talk about this enough, and I feel like there's been so many podcasts that I've been on and I've recorded that I keep telling BDMs like if you think that your credentials and your knowledge is instilled on your digital footprint because of the properties that you've just listed and just leased, I'm sorry, but I have to argue that perhaps you are not feeling confident in the knowledge that you have in the property management industry because a lot of landlords that I see show up on these Facebook groups or the investor forums aren't asking what properties have just been listed and just been leased. They're asking about VCAT or the court legislation. My tenant has just left and absolutely freaking destroyed the property. What do I do? Yeah, like that's the stuff that people that keeps them up at night, right? And a BDM, you are problem solving. So let's start
yeah.
talking about the non-fluffy stuff, right?
No, man. Well, if I was an investor, I'd be wanting to speak to a BDM that can talk to the in Victoria. This is that can talk to what the Minister for Consumer Affairs brought out at the back end of last year about the legislation changes that they want to bring in again to
Mm,
make it
yeah,
even more. So they're just pushing. They're just pushing the industry in the state to socialism without having to pay for it, which I think's a little bit sort of have your cake and eat it, to be
Oh
honest.
yeah.
But if I was an investor, I'd be wanting to hear a BDM talk to me about that, right? Because that's the stuff that's front and center in our minds. We are so guided by the media in terms of what's important, right? That's just a fact.
Yeah.
So as a BDM, you've got to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on out there
Yeah.
in the news and what have you, right? If I was a BDM, it would be my breakfast reading is to have a quick scan of the media to see if there's any property articles come out, right? Any incentives, the new home incentive, the stamp duty scrapping for new homes for anybody now, right? To try and stimulate that. Being able to talk to that, it might not affect that particular investor. That investor might have a 40-year-old established 3 bed, 1 bath, and it's got nothing to do with them. But they'll talk about it.
Mhm.
Guaranteed they'll really talk about it because it's in that sphere of influence for something that they're really focused on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
So,
on that, Andy, these human billboards, aka BDMs,
mm,
we've covered like so much today in terms of what we think it should be happening if you're considering not replacing BDM or whether you should have a BDM. I think we have shown the true value of a BDM in terms of strategies for growth and the impact that it can have on the business. We looked over the skills, not even skills, but just if you're looking to hire a BDM, the tangible self-determination that we need to embody in the organization. We talked about autonomy, which I think was incredible to have that perspective and really how we can show up when we have that belief and then confidence in ourselves. So with all of that, then
mm,
when it comes to winning business now, right? We're getting down to the nitty gritty because we've done the work, we're confident, we know our stuff, right? We care about helping investors because we know our purpose and our why is greater than just, showing up at our justice to properties. What can BDMs do when they are speaking with someone to help them win the business over? What do you think is like the number one thing, the biggest thing?
the more that you get investors to talk, the more likely you are to win,
Mm,
right? And the more questions you ask, the closer you are going to be to finding the truth. So there's two things. I know you've asked for one, but I'll give you two. I know that I had a way higher chance of getting a listing if they spoke more in the conversation.
mhm,
Because that means that I asked the right questions that invoked answers beyond yes and no. Right. So that was always my goal, to get them talking more than me. Right. That's part one. Now, the second part is the removal of unnecessary anxiety.
mm,
Right. Now, there is always going to be an inherent natural anxiety when you are allowing strangers to move into a property that you own. Right. There's always going to be an anxiety around that. Can't remove that
mm,
unless you're way too trusting as an individual. Um, but outside of that, everything else is within control. And therefore, for anything that creates any unrest, uncertainty, anxiety, upset in an investor is something that you could have prevented,
mhm,
right? So the key to it is at all stages is to always set expectations, right? And what I mean by that is it's not just setting expectations in terms of the management that they can expect and what have you. It's before that. It's way before that,
mm,
right? It's the minute that they pick up the phone and call and ask for you to give them and go and see them and get an appraisal done on their investment,
mm,
right? It starts then because you start as soon as you get the habit of setting expectations in every interaction, then you are lighting the path that you're about to ask them to walk along,
Mhm.
right? So, for example, in that very small example at the very, very start, instead of just starting asking them questions, you tell them. Say, right, great. Well, what we'll do is I'm going to ask you a couple of quick questions so I can get some information together that's going to be relevant to our conversation, and then we'll lock in a time that's going to be suitable for us to catch up either at the property or at your place. Obviously, it'd be great if I can go to the property if we're not going to meet there first. So we'll coordinate that after at the end of the conversation. Is that all right? They say yes,
Mhm.
and you've got a green light not only to go ahead and start asking questions, but you've removed the unnecessary anxiety that they will have in their minds because you haven't told them what's going to happen
Yeah.
in that conversation,
Yeah.
right? Not only that, the really cool byproduct of it is the fact that because you've asked for their permission to ask questions, when you ask the questions, you are likely to get way more fruitful information
Hmm.
because you've explained to them why those questions are relevant to the transaction,
Yeah.
right? So that's just a very, very small example of setting
Love
expectations.
it.
So you get to the end of the conversation, right? And you've locked in the appointment, blah, 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 blah. You've done a review of everything that you've talked about. So because then that shows them that you've actually paid attention, you've listened, and you've not been checking your Facebook while you've been having a conversation with them, and so on and so forth. And then once you've confirmed them and confirmed all of that sort of stuff, you then set expectations as to what's going to happen next. So for me, and this is how I coach salespeople, but it's entirely relevant for BDMs. I'd say, right, so okay, so from here, look, really looking forward to seeing you on Friday at 3 o'clock at the property. Um, Between now and then, so within the next minute or so, I'm going to send you a quick SMS confirmation of the appointment time and everything. That'll be from my direct mobile number. So if you do have any concerns, feel free to hit me up straight back on that contact number, and you'll get me directly. By the end of the day, I'm going to send you a little bit more information about ourselves and the organization and the processes involved when it comes to property management. Now, you mentioned to us that you have got an investment with another agency. So I'll send you the processes that we do because we feel confident that we can help to remove all the unnecessary anxiety that comes along with being an investor in the real estate market. So that'll be with you by the end of the day. I might just give you a quick text tomorrow morning just to make sure you got it. And if you haven't, just check your junk mail just in case because it can go through to there. On the day, so on Friday, what I'm going to do, first thing in the morning, what I'll do is I'll send you another quick SMS just to confirm that we're still on for 3 o'clock. And then as I'm about to get in the car, and I know exactly how long I'm going to be. I'll give you a call when I'm getting in the car to let you know that I'm going to be 20 minutes away, right? I've laid out the path, right? I've set expectations. Now, the benefits of doing this sort of behavior are multiple. One, you've removed unnecessary anxiety because you've made it absolutely clear what they can expect from you, right? When you meet those expectations, right? What we're trying to do here is we're trying to demonstrate value, right? And what's one of the biggest, if not the biggest problem that consumers have with the real estate industry en masse is that we don't do what we say we're going to
Communication.
do.
Communication.
We don't do what we say we're going to do. Our actions don't match our words. So by telling them what we're going to do, but then as soon as we actually tick those boxes from an expectation point of view, that's putting us 1, 2, 3% ahead of our competitors, like already subconsciously, right? Because we're earning the trust of that consumer by telling them what's going to happen and then making it happen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now, I used to get a little bit cheeky, and I can do this because I'm a pom. But when I used to get in the car before the appointment, if I was going to someone's house, I'd say, right, "Hey Sarah, it's Andy. Looking forward to saying hello and shaking your hand. I'm getting in the car now, so I'll be about 20 minutes, all being well. So maybe pop the kettle on in 10, and I'll see you there."
Love it.
Something along those lines, right? Because I'm a
Yeah.
pom and I like tea, and therefore it just goes together.
That's so memorable too, though, Andy. It's just like
Yeah.
just a small thing to be memorable.
But and then the thing is, when they open the door, if you follow that process for the first time, watch the reaction that you get when they greet you.
Mm.
It will go from guarded, cold, and weary wary, sorry, to warm, inviting, and welcome.
Mm,
You're already down a track with this consumer.
yeah,
So you get to the appointment and then you set the expectations again.
I love it.
Right,
I
something have a yarn
love
about
it.
this, this, and that. Then and you just keep setting expectations and meeting them, and you set the expectations for the next time.
I love it.
We'll do
And
that.
you're just the thesis and just how what's the word I'm looking for? In sync we are with our beliefs in terms of just the process. And I think it's just you're not even pushing someone either. It's you're just having a conversation with them. You're treating them like another human being, right? Ultimately, yes, we want to get the listing, but it's just also knowing that you can have a process and procedure in place and still be just a human being who's going there to offer a service to them and really listen to what their requirements are and what they need. But going back to even before when we were talking about knowing what our consumers want, if you are really listening every single time you are meeting with someone and you're in that listing presentation, you will already know their fears, doubts, and uncertainties and know how to speak to that, right? And that's when the collateral or your listing presentations or the stuff that you put out on your social media can already speak to that before they've even going, oh, actually, yeah, that was something that it has been on my mind. We become like people with a crystal ball, and they just think that we're mind reading them. But really, you're just getting that good at listening to these conversations that you know, and it's a repeat. The same fears, doubts, and uncertainties are on repeat when we listen to our clients, right? And it's our job to actually listen to those and make sure we are delivering the service that removes that anxiety from them is what is what you've said too. That's our responsibility then. And I think
No, totally.
if you're listening and going, well, I don't know how to do that, well, I would say, well, that's when you need to go chat to your directors. That's when you can upskill yourself and have mentors and trainers, because far out, there's so many people out there who can help you on your journey. So I love that, Andy. And I think that's a really, tangible thing that our listeners can take away today. And hopefully that's instilled that confidence in them to just, it doesn't have to be complicated either, right, Andy? Doesn't have to be complicated.
I love simple. Simple's
Yeah.
awesome.
Let's do
Simple's the
simple.
best. But having as much as I'm a lover of chaos, you in order to make sure that you can stay focused on the human bit, you need to make sure that you've got a solid process in terms of your delivery output.
Sure.
As key, and that's like I say, I'm not one for processes and structure and all that sort of stuff as such. However, we need to make sure that we can turn up in the same way every time
Mm.
in delivery. So that's why, I my last listing, although I'm coaching heaps and I'm still going to listing presentations with people and stuff like that. But in terms of me being a listing agent, like I haven't had that process in my game like since 2018. And I could rattle it off like it was yesterday,
Mm.
right? So as soon as you put the effort in to put a bit of structure around that sort of stuff, then you don't have to worry about it. It's just a set and forget. And then you can just focus on the person as opposed to the process. And then once you get to that stage, once you get to that position, and that's just hard work. That's there's no other thing for it. It's just hard graft to get it sorted. Once you've done that, then you're laughing and you can just focus on being you and them being them and rock and roll.
I love it. Andy, I just want to say a massive thank you for today. Just the knowledge that you have gifted our listeners with today is just phenomenal. And I absolutely love you as a person, and being alongside your journey is I'm really grateful for that. So on behalf of everyone listening today, thank you for joining the Rise Factor and our conversations for growth today. And I'm looking forward to celebrating your success this year and beyond.
Well, we're gonna have a couple of do's, so that should be good. That should be good. But in all seriousness, I just think that what you've done for this space has been nothing short of incredible. She's not paying me to say this, by the way, gang. What she's done for this space is nothing short of phenomenal, and I think that the value that is just emanating from Sarah and this whole Rise movement is something that the greater industry can take note of. So, Sarah, what you're doing is you're not just bringing information, you're not just helping BDMs grow. You're sort of setting an example as to how things could be done, and you got to be proud of yourself, kid. You really do.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Andy. Likewise, let's I'm here, let's make some noise this year, We're here for the movement. Purpose of why is clear and I'm all for to shake some things up. So let's do it.
Watch this space, gang. Watch this
Watch
space.
this space. And thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep rising. Thanks, Andy.